For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
7:08 on CJD. Welcome to today's Entrepreneur, presented by Fuller Landau. This is a program about the entrepreneurial spirit that drives Quebec business. My name is Dan Delmar, along with Fuller Landau's Josh Miller. How are you, sir?
I am excellent today, Dan.
Excellent. And this evening, our guest is Rick Hanna. Rick is from L'Usine du Spaghetti. Welcome, Rick.
Nice to be here.
And, well, it's not an actual factory, is it?
It's not an actual factory, no. And, you know, Dan, when we have guests on that the entrepreneurs in the food industry, it's terrible. You know, it's 7 p.m. It's after a long day. You kind of get hungry. But it's a great story to hear. The Canna family has been in the restaurant business for decades and decades. And the story is really interesting one. Looking forward to hear it. So, Rick, welcome. And maybe you can kind of tell the audience today, what is Usine de Spaghetti? What is your restaurant business today? And how did you or the family get started in it?
Well, L'Usine de Spaghetti is basically a pasta restaurant in Old Montreal. We've been there since 1977, and our family has owned the restaurant since 1987. We bought the building in 87, and I've been running the business ever since the day we bought it. Our family business started back in 1958. My parents came from India, and they opened their first restaurant in 1958, a snack bar called Tommy's Restaurant, which my father then enjoyed the business so much he opened the first Indian restaurant in Quebec called the Maharaja on Drummond. And we've owned a restaurant all our lives. We've always had a restaurant in the family.
Have you always been in the business? Has touched it when your parents were running it?
My parents made sure that my brother, I have a twin brother, and my sister were always involved in the restaurant. We were working from 13 years old, 12 years old, doing dishes, bussing tables. We've always been involved in the business.
So was it a difficult decision to kind of go into it and run your own place?
It was kind of a decision of necessity. I had gotten married that year, and my father looked at me and said, "You better start earning some money. So we're going to buy this restaurant, and you're going to run it. And what we want you to do is run it for 1 year. We'll keep the building, and we'll sell the business after 1 year." And after the first year, we made so much money at the spaghetti, we thought we can never sell this. So it's been with me ever since.
And so it's been a great experience through up and downs. You bought it or you started operating it in the late 80s, 87, 88, I think you said. I guess, and then the recession hit not too long after, certainly the early 90s. How did that have an effect on you?
Well, when the recession hit, I realized that the business in Old Montreal was busy only for the summer months. And I was interested in looking at getting busy also in the winter. So I started looking at expanding, and I bought another restaurant, a sports franchise here in Montreal with a partner in 1993, which had its own ups and downs. I'd never been in a franchise business before. I'd always been an independent. And it was an interesting process. I think the timing was wrong on owning a sports franchise in 1993.
What happened in 93?
Well, in 93, the Expos were the best team in baseball. The Canadians had just won the Stanley Cup, so I thought a sports bar would be a perfect fit. In August 93, the commissioner of baseball, Bug Zelig, pulled the plug on the year, so the Expos were done. And in September, hockey went on strike. So I owned this 6,000 square foot sports bar, and I was showing Rocky Balboa movies.
Now, you said you had a partner in these ventures. Have you had a partner before, a partner since, and what have you learned from that?
Yeah, I've had one other partner in another restaurant, and I just realized that it's very difficult in the restaurant business to have partners. It's better being your own decision maker and not having to answer to somebody else's way of doing business. So I don't think I would ever have another partner.
Any particular dispute or story that you remember that you know I'm never going to take this path again. This really I'm shied away from this.
Well, going back to the sports bar, in 93, the only thing that saved our business was making money off of the new legislation on the video lottery terminals. We were allowed to have 4 terminals in our bar, and that was the only way that we were making money. Now, my partner had no compunction about making money that way, and I could not stomach making money off of other people's misery. And after about 4 months, I turned to my partner and I said, I can't do this anymore. This is the only way that this business is going to survive is by the VLTs. Yeah, you're making good money, but can you go to sleep at night and wake up in the morning with those images in your head? And I couldn't.
And it was a franchise model you were working with. Is that something that you would have enjoyed to stay with had it been the right place, or it just wasn't for you, that franchising?
Franchising wasn't for me. I couldn't. I don't like answering to somebody above me telling me how to set my menu, who I have to purchase from, who I'm not allowed to purchase from. When I know owning my own business, besides the franchise, the price is in the market, and these large franchises, there's a lot of discounts and kickbacks that are open to the parent company that the franchisee doesn't know about, and you only become aware of that when you start asking questions. And we didn't know this going in, so the franchise aspect of it, like I said, is you have to really dot your I's and cross your T's before you sign up for a franchise.
On the flip side, are there benefits? I mean, certainly having a lot of things planned out for you, that must be a bit of a relief.
I think that somebody who wants to buy a franchise who has never run a restaurant before, he'll have a helping hand in a lot of decisions and a lot of questions that will come up in the restaurant business. But because of my family background and because my father and my mother were so involved in our businesses, I always had my father as a mentor who would answer these questions for me. I didn't need a parent company telling me what to do. And I think that was one of the reasons why it left a bad taste in my mouth being involved in a franchise.
And I think one of the other issues, and you said not having a partner, is, well, so who do I trust if I'm not around? And as a restaurateur, we've heard it time and time again, it requires almost 24/7 to be there. And when we get back on the break, I'm looking forward to hearing Rick's thoughts on trusting others and how he really fully spends his days.
Today's Entrepreneur continues. Our guest, Rick Canna from L'Usine du Spaghetti. It's 7:15 right now.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
7:18, welcome back to today's Entrepreneur. Our guest this evening is Rick Canna from L'Usine du Spaghetti, and a restaurant in the Old Port, there since 77. The family took it over in 87. And Rick, we've heard obviously lots of stories about the restaurant industry and how difficult it is. People, waitresses skimming tips and just all kinds of issues. What sort of issues have you had, and how difficult is it to trust people in the restaurant business?
Well, trust is a major issue in the restaurant business. There are a lot of temptations. The liquor, the money, like you say, the tips, the food. There are so many temptations, and it's almost impossible to have your eye on every issue. You have to, at one point, trust your staff that they're going to do the right thing by you. But to get to that level takes years. It took me 15 years before I would give the key to somebody else in my restaurant. I was opening and closing every day and every night. And I only then realized that that wasn't the right way to go about it. At a certain point, you have to give your staff a certain amount of trust and also responsibility that they will do the right thing. Because in essence, if I'm successful, they're successful. And I've learned that the hard way, where I did have a couple of issues with some staff that I had, given a little bit of too much slack to, and in the morning you'd see there would be bottles of wine that were missing, a couple of roast beefs going out the back door, things like that. But you learn from all that.
And how do you, with your own philosophy in treating your people, how do you deal with issues like that, and how do you try and prevent it from happening to begin with?
Well, I don't think in the restaurant business you can prevent it 100%. I think that there's always going to be a certain point where, that kind of personality is going to come out in somebody. But you can't be there all the time. If you're there all the time, then you have no family life, or you have no other thing going on but the restaurant. And I think that that's a lot of where a lot of restaurateurs kind of go overboard.
Do you feel, you mentioned family life, do you feel you've made some sacrifices in really working this business?
I've made a lot of sacrifices, but I've been very lucky that my wife was 100% behind me from the day I opened the restaurant, and she still is 100% behind me in all my decisions when it comes to the restaurant. She understood that in order for me to make this business work, I had to be there. And, I missed a lot of dance recitals. I missed a lot of, Canada Day parties and St. Jean-Baptiste parties because I was working. And I still miss them now, but it's different.
Now, let's come back to the employees for a second. Have you, after learning, I guess, over the years that you do have to rely on some people, have you changed at all your hiring practices or perhaps the questioning when you're bringing on new people?
No, I don't think so. I think I ask the same questions when I'm going to hire a new girl for the floor. I'm going to hire a new cook for the kitchen. Even if I'm going to hire a new dishwasher, it's always the same questions because it's always the same issues that come up. Everybody comes in, thinks they all think they're smarter than you, and in the end, you've seen it all before.
Do you put any specific systems in place so that you monitor them?
Well, the systems that we have in place right now are we have a new computer system thanks to Revenue Quebec,
which we'll address. Yes,
and the systems are basic systems that I've implemented over the last 15, 20 years that I found have worked for me and have worked for my specific restaurant. But I think every restaurant is different.
And I believe that when entrepreneurs are looking at their systems, they've really got to tailor it to what works for them. And then sometimes, of course, the government comes in,
tailors
Big
it
Brother,
for them,
and tailors it for them, and tries to point them in the direction that's, of course, beneficial for the state, but certainly doesn't always hurt for the entrepreneur. And in the restaurant business, with Quebec imposing these new cash register systems, I think it's I'm very curious to hear what Rick has to say on that topic, and looking forward to it.
And I'm sure some other restaurateurs out there also have some experiences, and they're welcome to join the conversation as well at 790-0991 or Start Talk on Bell Mobility. So we'll get to Rick's thoughts on that controversial cash register system, now obligatory for restaurants in Quebec, in just a second. It's 7:23 on Today's Entrepreneur.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Inspiring stories from outstanding business people, Dan Delmar, along with Fuller Landau's Josh Miller on Today's Entrepreneur. Our guest this evening, Rick Hanna from L'Usine du Spaghetti. And Rick, we were talking about how difficult the restaurant industry can be sometimes, certainly a very high-stress environment. And there's one case in particular which I think illustrates that, which is, well, it's kind of funny and scary at the same time.
Yeah, I can remember one night when I was in the restaurant. I was in the dining room, and one of the waitresses came up to me and she said, "Rick, you got to get into the restaurant, get into the kitchen." And before I even got one foot into the kitchen, I could hear the screaming going on. And I had 3 cooks and a dishwasher. Each one of them had a knife in their hand, and they were swearing to kill the next one beside them. I felt like I was in a scene from Star Trek, where I was Captain Kirk, and I had 3 aliens around me trying to kill me. But what we did was we closed the kitchen, and we served whatever people were left in the restaurant. We got all the orders out, and I took everybody outside, and I said, "Like, you guys, you can't do this. I mean, it's just one of you is going to end up in the hospital." But it was just a fight over nothing.
You certainly have to deal occasionally crisis management. You have to absolutely think on your feet. Do you have a management philosophy or kind of a people philosophy that you follow that's worked for you?
I do. I mean, I think basically, in general, people are good. I don't think that anyone really tries to be nasty or tries to make it a point to try and steal from the boss or steal from another employee. I really think that basically, if you give people the chance to show them what they're worth, they normally can do it. And in the restaurant business, it's magnified 10 times because it's down the line. It's from the kitchen to the floor to the hostess, right out the door to the customer.
Now, sometimes in businesses, they rely on outside associations to try and help and try and find, the right method, or how can things work? How can we group together and make things work? Now, I understand in the restaurant business in certain quartiers, there's Merchants Association. I would imagine in Old Montreal there is such one as well. Has that helped? How has that worked?
There is a Merchants Association in Old Montreal, although it's kind of fragmented. Old Montreal has certain pockets. You have Place Jacques-Cartier, you have St. Paul Street, you have De la Commune, you have west of Saint Laurent. And I think the problem with the Merchants Association in Old Montreal is that they can't get together and make decisions for the entire community of Old Montreal. They make decisions that affect only one street or 2 streets. When you look at the Grand Prix weekend on Crescent Street, these guys have their act together. They know what's going on. They know that week they can make 15-20% of their year in 1 week, and they're convinced that by shutting down the street and putting efforts into staging and putting in cars and kiosks and everything, that they can run their business better for that week or so. Their Merchants Association works. In Old Montreal, like I said, it's fractured. You have certain parts of Old Montreal where it's closed for 6 months, and then the other, just a block away, they'll be open for the entire year. So I understand that it's difficult, but there should be a way around it.
As an entrepreneur, are there any people that you kind of rely on or bounce ideas off of to try and help your business?
The only person that I ever bounce ideas off of are my wife and my mother and my father. They're the ones who, their advice I trust the most. And I to this day, my father with his experience and my mother with her experience, I take their advice over anybody else's.
You'd consider those people or your father as a mentor?
He is my mentor.
You know, and in listening to Rick, and you hear about the people around that could help a business that aren't always so useful. And I think entrepreneurs really have to weed out the areas there, because there's a lot of people that would want to come in and either take advantage or think that they're trying to come out for themselves, even though they're trying to disguise it as helping you. And entrepreneurs just have to know who they can trust and who they can go to. The fact that Rick has that in his own family, he's certainly a big plus, and it's beneficial, but something entrepreneurs have to weed through every day. Who can really help me?
Here's who many restaurateurs can trust: the government. And certainly lately, we've had this law which makes it obligatory for restaurateurs to have this billing system inside of the restaurants, this electronic billing system. Very controversial in the industry right now, and we'll get Rick's thoughts on that in just a few moments. It's 7:30 on Today's Entrepreneur.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
$7:36. Welcome back to Today's Entrepreneur, presented by Fuller Landau. This is a program about the entrepreneurial spirit that drives Quebec business. Dan Delmar, along with Josh Miller from Fuller Landau, and our guest this evening from L'Usine de Spaghetti, Rick Hanna. Not an actual spaghetti factory. It's a restaurant in the Old Port. And the big thing on the minds of restaurateurs lately, Rick, is, of course, this system being imposed on you all by the Quebec government. Tell us a bit about the new rules and why you have to spend a whole lot of money to get your restaurants a bit more digital these days.
Well, the Revenue Department, Quebec Revenue Department, has implemented some new legislation for 2011. Actually started in 2010. Where you have to have a computerized MEV system on every cash register in your restaurant or in your store. This is going to make sure that every sale and every, basically every bit of revenue that comes into the restaurant will be recorded, and which is fine. But the government has, it's expensive. It costs about $6,000 per machine, and some people need 4 or 5 machines in their store, so it can get very pricey. You have until the end of November to have this put in your store. Otherwise, you will, I think, basically be shut down.
How has this affected the industry and your business in particular?
Well, for us, what it's done is it's brought computers into my business. I'm not that computer savvy, so it's helped me a lot with the computer aspect of the business. And it's made basic bookkeeping just that much more easier for me, that's all.
You were doing everything by hand before?
We were doing everything by hand, and all the bills were being recorded in a ledger, and that way of doing business now is become obsolete as far as the Revenue Department is concerned. So as of November 30th, you can no longer have any more handwritten bills. We put the machines in March, but you have only another month to do it.
What type of effect will this have on the average Montreal restaurant? Because, I mean, you hear the expense $5,000-$6,000 per unit, and a lot of small business owners out there are, I'm sure, kind of shocked by that. I mean, a lot of people couldn't take that expense. Well,
you are going to get a certain grant back from the government, but the longer you wait, the less of a grant you get. When we did it, we got almost the full amount back. It was $4,000 a machine that we got back. Now, getting closer to November, I think it's only about 10% that you're going to get back. And as of November, after that, there'll be no more grant. You'll have to put it in, and the restaurant will bear the full brunt of the expense. You had a year to do this. So it's not like the government has just all of a sudden turned around in 1 month and said, okay, now this has to be done. So everyone knew that this day was coming.
Do you think that'll result in some of your competition maybe closing its doors?
I think that a lot of restaurants are for sale. Whether or not they'll close is another issue. I know that the government has had studies on how much money was being lost to undeclared sales and income tax that wasn't being paid, and the GST and QST on those sales. Whether their numbers are right or not, I don't know. But the thing that they've done is they've painted everybody with the same brush. They've said that, because they've audited a few restaurants and they found discrepancies, they basically said the industry is corrupt and let's do this legislation.
The reality is you've had systems before, you'll have systems now. It's a little bit different, it's a little automated. I guess there is some benefit as well. What would be the benefit to these systems in restaurants and in particular yours?
Well, the benefit is, like I said, the bookkeeping, the general bookkeeping is much easier. The girls, the way they close their caches, it's much easier. There's no longer any more, I'm $10 short, I'm $5 short. It is what it is now. That's all it is. But for us, we never had an issue with that. It's the guys who, like I said, that small, maybe 5 or 10% of people who tried to get away with things, they're the ones that are going to be affected.
Now let's talk about competition. Certainly it might affect, it might not. Do you keep tabs on your competition, like the people in the restaurants around you?
All the time. I look at what other restaurants are putting on as specials. I look at what other menus are going up in Montreal. I walk around the area twice a day to see what's going on as far as competition. It's that cutthroat out there that if you don't do it, you can fall through the cracks so quickly, and it'll take months before you can catch up.
Really staying on top of everybody and everything around you.
Exactly. You have to know exactly what your competition's up to.
And a pretty competitive environment, too, I'm sure, with the tourists in the summer as well. Give us an idea about how you sort of lure in people from outside of Montreal, people who may not be familiar with the restaurant.
Well, we're lucky in our restaurant where we have a great word of mouth on our restaurant, and also that we've been there for so long. But the newer restaurants coming up, it's harder for them to do that. The tourists come into town and they rely on the hotel concierge, or they rely on friends of theirs who have visited Montreal, and that's basically where they get their information. In Old Montreal, we're very lucky where if someone's coming into the city for 3 or 4 days, in one of those days they're going to end up in Old Montreal. So it's eventually they're going to walk by our restaurant, or they're going to be in Plage Arcade, and we will be visible for them.
I'm sure foot traffic plays a huge role, but what about online, social media? Have you ventured in that? Do you think that would help?
Well, like I said before, I'm not too computer savvy, and I'm a little bit of a dinosaur when it comes.
It's never too late.
I'm a little bit of a dinosaur when it comes to the computer, but my daughter has opened a restaurant in Old Montreal, and they rely heavily on these food blogs and Twitter and the social media for their word of mouth.
So you speak of your daughter. So is there a next generation in the restaurant business?
Absolutely. She's been with me. She's been working with me in my restaurant for the last 3 or 4 years, and this year she's opened her first restaurant.
And what is the restaurant? Where is it?
It's on Notre Dame Street. It's called Pilot. It's a different restaurant than what I'm used to. It's more of a higher end. It's a Canadian fusion type of cooking, dynamic food, dynamic staff, and I'm really keeping my fingers crossed for her.
Are you hands-off or hands-on? Do you let the bird fly out of the nest, or do you kind of keep tabs?
I let the bird fly out of the nest with a safety net, and I really want her to be independent, and I want her to make her own way. But I also want her to rely on my years of experience, the same way I relied on my father.
And as we come up to kind of getting to part way to the end of the show, I got to just ask you location. Certainly restaurants, location, if you don't have it as number 1, 2, and 3 on top of your priority list, you're kind of dead. So tell us what location means to you.
It's almost everything in the restaurant business. Unless you can establish your location as a destination, out of the way place because of the cooking or the style of restaurant you are, if you don't have the right location, you're doomed to failure. And I think it's a big mistake that a lot of restaurateurs make in thinking that I can open a restaurant just because of my food or because of my my connections in the industry, and I'll be successful. If you don't have that street traffic, if you don't have at least, a couple...
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Welcome back to today's Entrepreneur. Our guests is this evening, Rick Hanna from Rosine de Spaghetti, and we also bring into the conversation Patrick Sullivan, a partner at Fuller Landau, and your trustee, Josh.
Yeah, now Patrick is going to enlighten us on all the scary thoughts that some entrepreneurs should know. Welcome, Patrick, and really just start us off. What really should entrepreneurs and directors know about these potential hidden liabilities?
Thanks, guys, for being here. Yeah, quite scary out there at certain times. Obviously, more so when companies get into financial difficulties, because that's where all these potential liabilities really find their way through. But you have to start by the basics, which are deductions at source for obvious reasons are considered a super priority, where directors have a personal liability. There has been implemented a few years back what is called the WEP program, which is the Wage Earner Protection Program Act, which also now includes a super priority which ranks ahead of banks to the tune of $2,000 per employee. Obviously, we say it ranks ahead of banks, but if there are no sufficient assets to be realized upon, they will go against directors. And we obviously provide them with the trustee provides them with all that information.
Is it law to provide this information to the banks, government, financial institutions?
In the case of insolvency situations, yes, the trustees are obliged to provide this information. We have to register each employee for them to be entitled to get that $2,000 from the government. The government obviously becomes subrogated into the employee's rights and then claims into the bankruptcy. If there are funds to pay that amount, yes, directors could be off the hook to a certain degree, because this amount of $2,000 is limited to 6 months of unpaid salary and vacation. So that doesn't necessarily mean that that's the total amount that's owed to that employee. So there would be a recourse there, obviously.
Now you say it's vacation pay, it's pay. Is it all relating to any type of deduction source? And what can the entrepreneur do to maybe protect himself a little bit?
Well, probably the best protection is to have an external payroll service where normally the deductions at source will be taken immediately out of the bank account upon each remittance. That's somewhat of a protection. I guess the best protection is to pay current your salaries, because a lot of people think, okay, we're paying them twice a month, so we're always spinning off 2 weeks behind, and figure that $2,000 runs fast in these day and ages. So that liability could be mitigated if people were paid on a weekly basis for the current week.
How aggressive? I mean, does the government automatically come back and go after directors if they can't collect? Are they really aggressive? Do they start seizing? What's been your experience in that?
Well, since the coming of the WEP program, because that information is made readily available, I would tend to say yes, they come immediately after directors for whatever they don't get out of the realization. And obviously, that being said, the employees are also very well informed now, and they're informed of their rights. So whatever they don't get from the government, they can also go after directors, and normally through les normes du travail, they will do that.
And now there's also, I understand, there's CSST, which is, as I understand, part of the payroll service. So is CSST also part of this now?
CSST is now also has also become a priority towards directors, and funny enough, they're in their act, they're even entitled to penalties and interest. So it's not only a question of a certain amount that has not been paid, it's also a question of coming after directors for penalties and interest.
And there's so much in the CSST Act that, I mean, it's a huge Bible of information that so many entrepreneurs and business owners just don't even realize what they're getting into. Is there any, when you're experiencing, Patrick, the employees coming after, do they talk to the entrepreneurs, talk to the employees first? Do they kind of get involved with them?
Well, so you have to be careful, because sometimes it's not the employee that instigated this. It will get instigated through the government if they didn't receive their $2,000 back from the estate, or it can also be instigated through les normes du travail, who will, because the information is available, will take one employee and then will tag on all of the employees to go after directors. So some of these employees don't necessarily know that they're being represented at some point until they get a form to sign, and then it's already in the makings.
It's and certainly it's kind of off balance sheet. You don't always realize it's going to happen, and there's certainly a cash flow issue at play, because do you want to make sure you have enough money aside, God forbid something happens, or and certainly in the restaurant business, Rick, it's some people are great in cash flush, but we all know that restaurants sometimes work from hand to mouth, so they can't always be that prepared when in this situation.
You're right. A lot of restaurants are working only month to month. And if an issue like this arises, where do you get $2,000 for an employee if you've got 5 or 6 employees? If it's a small mom and pop run place, that's a lot of money.
And certainly when the businesses are working with banks and getting financing, the banks, I'm sure, have to look at this and say, hey, wait a second, I better protect myself. And I think, Patrick, I'm sure you've had experience in this. And when we come back from the quick break, I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
7:53 on today's Entrepreneur, and as well, we'll get to Rick's parting thoughts, parting advice for today's Entrepreneur.
For professional advice with a personal touch, consult Fuller Landau, Chartered Accountants and Business Advisors. Click on flmontreal.com.
Remaining moments of today's Entrepreneur, a program about the entrepreneurial spirit that drives Quebec business. And our guest this evening, Rick Canna from L'Usine du Spaghetti, and Patrick Sullivan, trustee with Fuller Landau.
Now, Patrick, just before we left, entrepreneurs deal with banks and financing all the time. And these unknown or unfunded liabilities that are definitely out there, the bankers are all over it, and they know they got to protect their rear end. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, what normally happens, Josh, is that the bank will take a reserve on the availability. So the funds made available to the company, there will be a reserve representing normally an estimate of what the priorities or super priorities could be. The easiest way for them to do it, despite the fact that it's not necessarily true according to the books, is to say if you have 100 employees, it's $2,000 a head, the super priority there. We're going to reserve $200,000 off your line of credit.
So if you're able to borrow $1 million and that's your line, the bank might come back and say, you know what, you can only take $800,000 because we got to protect ourselves.
Correct. That's the way it works. And over and above that, they will also slap on if there's a reserve for deductions at source or a reserve for CSST. These are all what they call priorities, and they make sure that they're covered with them. Certain banks also include GST and QST to that number. So any kind of potential liability will be reflected by the non-availability in funds on the line of credit.
In today's economy, and certainly in past recessions, do you find that the banks kind of change their tune a little bit, or kind of squeeze even harder and try and make sure that, as I said earlier, their rear ends get covered?
Well, more and more, they not to go to the defense of the banks, they don't have that much of a choice. Normally, they lend on assets. Now, if everybody has a priority ranking ahead of you on those assets, at a certain point, you have to make sure that you're going to be covered. So that's basically, and it's priorities have always existed, and they have always taken reserves. The truth of the matter is that today there are more and more priorities tagging on to the same assets. So yeah, they're protecting themselves in that way. Are they more aggressive or less aggressive? I couldn't really say, but those have always been there. It's just that the volume has expanded.
And one last quick question. If an entrepreneur has loaned money to his business or invested in his business, is it worthwhile to register that loan and maybe have him as kind of in rank ahead of some others?
Well, if the investment has been made while the company obviously is a viable company, yes, it's not a bad idea to take a security position on the assets. That being said, you have to understand that the bank will want to be a priority, and you have all those priorities ranking ahead of the loans you may have made.
Great. Thanks very much, Pat. And Rick, certainly as you've told your story to a lot of very interested people, what would be the one piece of advice you would give to today's entrepreneur?
Well, in the restaurant business, it's basic risk and reward. If you take a big risk in a restaurant, you can be very, very successful and enjoy a very fruitful existence. But you've got to be able to take that risk. And any entrepreneur who's not willing to take a risk should get out of it.
And Dan, thanks very much, Rick. Dan, certainly the takeaway I get a couple of takeaways. One is, in the restaurant game, you kind of got to go with your gut. You got to know your business inside and out, and you kind of live and eat, so to speak, eat and breathe it. you got to be there 24/7. Notwithstanding that, I believe what Rick kind of learned a little bit along the way was you do at some point have to release some of the reins. You do at some point have to trust somebody or a few people so that you literally don't have to be there 24/7. You can be there maybe only 14 hours a day instead of 20 hours a day. And I think it's a very hard lesson for any entrepreneur to learn, is how to trust, how to find that right individual so that they can pass on a little bit of responsibility so you can go out and either spend time somewhere else or not have the sacrifice of losing time with the family.
Rick, from Nuisins de Spaghetti, thanks so much. Very interesting story, and I appreciate you coming in tonight.
Thank you, Dan.
And also thanks to Patrick Sullivan, trustee and partner with Fuller Landau. And Josh, we're off next week.
Off
back
next
in
week.
2 weeks.
We're back in 2 weeks on Halloween, October 31st. And that show we have Kalis Air. And they're in the aviation business, really supporting almost everything in the aviation world.
Right. Maybe I'll dress up like an accountant for the show.
Maybe I'll dress up like radio announcer.
Thanks, Josh. You can visit Fuller Landau during business hours at 514-875-2865 or visit their website, www.flmontreal.com. 8 o'clock news is next on CJAD.